Hey guys, the world is currently under one of the greatest health and economic crises in history. With solid economies that keep issuing money to overcome the crisis, the increase of Bitcoin, and the uncertainty of global financial markets, there's a race between countries to see which will remain among the most powerful in the world. According to estimates by the International Monetary Fund based on GDP per capita, these are the 11 richest countries in the world in 2021. Number 11. Sweden. The industrial sector, which accounts for 23% of the GDP and is heavily reliant on the production of large companies such as Electrolux, Volvo, Scania, Ericsson, and IKEA, is one of the two most important sectors for the Swedish economy. The other is services, which accounts for 65% of GDP and is fueled by telecommunications and information technology services. Despite Sweden being one of the European countries with the fewest regulations, it also experienced a downturn as a result of its primary trading partners, the Nordic nations and the European Union. The Swedish krona, in general, remains a strong international currency. With a current population of 10.15 million people, its GDP is expected to grow approximately 3.5% in comparison to 2020. Reaching $57,660 per citizen. Number 10. Denmark. Janteloven, or Jante's Law, is a moral notion that is prevalent in Denmark and other Nordic nations. It prioritizes societal well-being over individualism and personal ambition, and it makes equality a fundamental component of interpersonal relationships and legislative choices. That also explains why, in comparison to nations where few have a lot and many have a lot less, we can remark that the average Danish purchasing power is close to $60,000. In comparison to countries that rely significantly on manufacturing, tourism, or petroleum product exports, the Kingdom of Denmark has a contemporary and internationally competitive service-based economy, which implies that both family and public budgets were less harmed by the epidemic. Its 5.8 million residents benefit from strong employment rates and incomes, a well-functioning social security system, and it consistently ranks first among the world's happiest countries. Number 9. Hong Kong SAR. Current international dollars, 59,519. This Chinese special administrative area is a gateway to the mainland and Asia's leading financial hub, having been a former British colony. Hong Kong's economy is distinguished by minimal taxation, no capital gains or inheritance taxes, no tariffs on goods, imports, or exports, and complete ownership of a firm for foreigners who do not have to be citizens, residents, or nationals. As a result, despite its small size of 1,104 square kilometers, this tiny island is very diverse. This isn't to suggest that the city's 7.5 million citizens are entirely poor. According to government data, 1 out of every 5 people lives in poverty. Meanwhile, Hong Kong is vying with New York for the title of World Metropolis with the most ultra-high net worth individuals, with around 9,000 people with a net worth of $30 million or more. Surprisingly, rising economic disparity has been a role in the political turmoil that has roiled Hong Kong since 2019, hurting businesses and frightening foreign investors. Thanks to the pandemic, the economy contracted last year by 6.1%, the sharpest decline on record. Number 8. Brunei Darussalam. Current international dollars, 62,371. This is where Hassan al-Bolkiah, Sultan of Brunei, resides and gets his $20,000 haircut. There are 1,788 rooms, including 257 bathrooms, a banquet hall that can seat up to 5,000 visitors, a mosque for 1,500 people, an air-conditioned stable for 200 polo horses, 5 pools, and 18 elevators. His income, acquired from the country's vast oil and natural gas reserves, is believed to be over $28 billion, more than 50 times that of Queen Elizabeth of the United Kingdom. However, not everything in the Sultanate is roses, and not just because Bolkiah is no longer the world's wealthiest king, a distinction he held for many years. Thailand's King Maha Vajiralongkorn is approximately $15 billion wealthier. Malnutrition is widespread in Brunei, despite the monarch's affluence and an on-paper per capita spending power of almost $60,000. Despite the lack of statistics, it is believed that 40% of the 450,000-strong population earns less than $1,000 per year. With just a few hundred cases reported, the country escaped the worst of the COVID-19 epidemic. What it was not spared was from the pandemic-related plunge in oil prices. After registering a 13-year high of 3.9% economic growth in 2019, GPD growth fell to 1.2% in 2020. Number 7. The United States. Current international dollars, 63,415. Did we mention that the wealthiest nations are also the smallest? Of course, this is not the situation for the United States, which, despite a tough 2020, managed to jump into the top 10 after hovering on the verge for the better part of 2 decades. But did the epidemic make Americans wealthier? It varies depending on who you ask. Certainly not those who lost their jobs and companies and were left with massive medical bills and other expenditures to pay, who waited in line at food banks. Those in the top quintile of the population, earning more than $60,000 per year, were able to continue working from home in many situations, and their stock investments increased in value. On top of that, they got stimulus checks. Another tale concerns how the ultra-wealthy fared amid the healthcare crisis. According to the Institute for Policy Studies, the combined wealth of America's 719 billionaires increased by $1.62 trillion, or 55%, from $2.95 trillion to $4.56 trillion between March 2020 and April 2021. They now have about 4 times the wealth of the roughly 165 million Americans in the lowest half of society. According to the research tank, the relationship was flipped in 1990, when billionaires owned $240 billion and the bottom half owned $380 billion. In other words, if you're an American and your income is a fraction of the average GPD per capita, it's fair to argue that someone else is probably eating your proverbial lunch. Number 6. Norway. Current international dollars, 65,800. Norway's economic engine has been powered by oil since the discovery of substantial offshore deposits in the late 1960s. As the leading petroleum producer in Western Europe, the country has reaped the benefits of rising prices for decades. Not any longer. Prices plummeted at the start of 2020, followed by a global pandemic, and the krone plummeted. Last year, the Norwegian economy shrank by 2.5%, the worst yearly fall in more than half a century, and probably since World War II. Does this imply that Norwegians now are considerably poorer than they were a few years ago? Probably not, and GPD growth is expected to return to 3.9% in 2021. Furthermore, when it comes to any economic problem fate might throw at them, Norwegians can always count on their $1.3 trillion sovereign wealth fund, the world's largest. Yet, Norwegians know that with great wealth comes great responsibility. Unlike many other rich nations, high per capita GPD figures are truly a reflection of people's financial well-being, since Norway has amongst the lowest income inequality gaps in the world. Number 5. Switzerland. Current international dollars, 72,873. The bobsleigh, white chocolate, and of course the Swiss Army knife. However, the computer mouse, immersion blender, Velcro, and LSD are also included. The list goes on and on. These are just a few of the innovations that Switzerland has made available to the rest of the globe. However, nowadays, this 8.6 million strong country owes most of its riches to banking and insurance services, as well as tourism and exports of medicines, jewels, and precious metals, precise instruments and machineries, from watches to medical apparatuses and computers. Is it really surprising that Switzerland has the world's largest concentration of millionaires? According to the most recent estimates, for every 100,000 residents, there are 9,428 of them, billionaires included. The 11.8% of the total considering just the adult population. All of that money, however, was not enough to protect the Swiss economy from the impacts of COVID-19. Output fell by 2.9% in 2020. Things might have been worse, especially when we consider that the contraction rates in Italy, Spain, France, and Germany were 8.8%, 10.9%, 8.2%, and 4.9% respectively. What is the source of the disparity? According to the IMF, this is due not only to the Swiss economy's makeup, which includes solid public and household finances, competitive export industries, and low reliance on contact-intensive sectors, but also to a quick and sustained policy response through emergency spending and containment measures. Number 4. Qatar. Current international dollars, 93,508. It's not only last year's oversupply and demand problem, which was exacerbated by COVID-19. Oil prices have been falling steadily and sometimes dramatically since the mid-2010s. A Qatari citizen's per capita GPD was above $143,222 in 2014, but it was only $97,846 a year later, and it is currently much lower. Despite the fact that the country's oil, gas, and petrochemical reserves are vast, and its population is small, only 2.8 million, this marvel of ultra-modern architecture, luxury shopping malls, and exquisite cuisine has topped the list of the world's richest nations for the last 2 decades. Despite the fact that just approximately 12% of the population is Qatari, COVID-19 grew rapidly among low-income migrant laborers living in cramped quarters in Kuwait, as it did in many other Gulf states. Despite the fact that Qatar has been subjected to several quarantines, curfews, and lockdowns, the country has one of the highest percentages of positive cases in the area. Despite this, the economy has shown some resilience. It shrank by just 2.6% in 2020 and is now expected to revive as gas output and investment increase in preparation for the 2022 World Cup. Number 3. Ireland. Current international dollars, 94,391. Ireland appeared invincible until lately. While the rest of Europe was beset by uncertainty, Brexit, trade tensions with the United States, refugee and migrant crises, to name a few, the Irish economy continued to thrive. In 2019, while the Eurozone grew by only 1.2%, the Irish economy grew by over 5.9%, cementing its position as the continent's fastest-growing country. All of that reversed in 2020, when economic growth was cut by more than half from prior levels, though it is projected to pick up again this year. Ireland, with a population of less than 5 million people, was one of the countries most impacted by the 2008 financial crisis. This island country restored fiscal health, increased employment rates, and saw its per capita GPD nearly double in a short period of time after implementing politically tough reforms such as substantial cutbacks to public sector pay and reforming its banking industry. Do folks now feel twice as wealthy as they were 10 years ago? Probably not. Ireland is one of the greatest corporate tax havens in the world, with regular citizens benefiting considerably less than multinational corporations. And while they are definitely better off than they were, according to OECD data, national household per capita disposable income is actually lower than the average of all member nations, at around $25,300 versus $33,600 per year. Furthermore, with the anticipated removal of government pandemic aid, the country's unemployment rate is predicted to rise to 8.1% from its current 5.8%, leaving roughly 100,000 more people jobless than before the epidemic. With such a large disparity between the wealthy and the poor, the top 20% of the population earns about 5 times as much as the bottom 20%. Most families would reject the notion of being wealthy. Number 2. Singapore. Current international dollars, 97,056. The richest person in Singapore is restaurateur Zhang Yong, who is worth an estimated $23 billion. Goh Cheng Liang, 93, the founder of one of the world's largest paint manufacturers, is a close second with a fortune of $21.7 billion. Eduardo Saverin, the co-founder of Facebook, is in the third position with assets of over $15 billion, to some people's surprise. He departed the United States in 2011 with 53 million shares of the business and became a permanent resident of the island country. Saverin chose Singapore not simply for its metropolitan attractions or natural wonders, but also because it is a wealthy fiscal haven with tax-free capital gains and dividends. How did Singapore, on the other hand, become so prosperous? One half of the population was illiterate when the city-state gained independence in 1965. With almost no natural resources, Singapore has worked its way up the economic ladder through hard work and sound policies to become one of the world's most business-friendly cities. Singapore is currently a vibrant trading, manufacturing, and financial center. Most importantly, 98% of the adult population is now literate. That is not to suggest it has been immune to the impacts of the global downturn. The GPD contracted by 5.4% in 2020, plunging the country into recession for the first time in more than a decade. Number 1. Luxembourg. Current international dollars, 118,001. Luxembourg is known for its castles and picturesque landscape, as well as for its cultural festivals and gourmet delicacies. Alternatively, you might just open an offshore account with one of its banks and never return, as many people do. It's a shame, because the tiny nation of roughly 625,000 people, located in the center of Europe, has a lot to offer to both tourists and inhabitants. Luxembourg invests a significant portion of its riches in improving housing, healthcare, and education for its citizens, who have by far the best quality of living in the Eurozone. Despite this, the global financial crisis and EU and OECD attempts to eliminate banking secrecy have had minimal effect on the economy. The coronavirus outbreak forced many businesses to close and workers to lose their jobs. Still, through effective testing and contact tracing measures, Luxembourg has weathered the pandemic better than most of its European neighbors. As a result, in 2021, the Grand Duchy's GPD will rebound by 4% from negative 1.3% in 2020. The country topped the $100,000 mark in per capita GPD in 2014 and has never looked back ever since. Even the pandemic couldn't change that. If you liked the video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and don't forget to comment your opinion on this country's richness. That's it for now, guys. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next video.